Okay. Happy Tuesday, folks. All right, so we'll take a few moments to let folks get in here. All the usuals. Like microphone doesn't want to sit the way I want it to sit. I really need to get a better arm. I have this like super El Cheapo like $12 arm that I use, and this mic's kind of heavy for it. Also, it'd probably help if I was using a real desk. A little known secret why I don't really show my desk. One, it's a mess. But two, and this is just random filler time, mind you. I have, ever since I moved into my house almost 7 years ago, I temporarily bought myself a plastic folding table because I had been looking at getting a quote gaming desk, and that never ended up surfacing. So I've been using the same plastic folding table as my desk ever since then. And when you try to clamp a microphone arm, which is this bad boy right here, into plastic, it kind of like crushes part of the underside where the crank is, which is hilarious. Anyway, I hope everybody's doing good. I have a couple like short announcements, and then we'll jam into this bad boy. Other than like, obviously, I need a desk that is a proper desk, and not a folding freaking table. Oh man. Well, hi, Fishy Mailman. What's up, buddy? I'm going to be lurking, doing water changes. It's raining and thunderstorms, so got to capitalize on the barometric pressure drop. Hit thumbs up, peeps. Thanks, Bentley. Stay awesome. Why, thank you, sir. I only have like one. Well, I guess my quarries would care about barometric pressure, but really the only thing it really cares is good old, phenomenal Danger Doodle. Somebody talking smack about my hat. How dare you? My Kraken are going to be great. They get to use the cheater. Funny story. I actually do have some new hats coming. So for those who have like seen, I normally wear this. I have a small like selection of hats, and I have one that has like a raccoon on it. That's a minor league baseball team. And I decided I was going to go. My new like fun thing for myself was I was going to start collecting minor league baseball hats for the goofier mascots that are out there, or some of the teams that have some kind of interesting significance. So like, there's a lot of like, there's the Savannah Bananas, for example. There's the Hillsboro Hops, and like their mascots just look funny. So I ordered a couple because because I wanted some new hats, and I kind of try to rotate through, but I only have like 4 that I actively wear. And this is kind of like my not like plain Jane. Like you guys have seen me. I wear khakis and like buttoned up plaid shirts. I definitely do not have any major fashion sense, but hats are kind of where I express myself a little bit. So, oh man, I'm getting all these great. Yeah, so I've seen the Lincoln Salt Dogs, and that's it's on my list. It's just not in the first order, as well as the Lansing Lugnuts. So thank you for you minor league baseball fans that know some of your crazy teams. One of the thing I was the saddest I couldn't get is that they did not have there's a team whose mascot is the Fireflies, and they have an alternate logo that's a mason jar full of fireflies. They did not have one that fits my giant head, because I have a big fat head to go with my big fat self. Anyway, let's get off hats. Let's talk fish. Jobert Viva. Why is everyone using this water trick? Typically we let a little bit of time go by to let folks get into the chat, and all notifications go out, stuff like that, before I get on topic. So, lately there's been a couple videos. Bob Steenfont did one. There was a live stream with KG Tropicals. They started talking about how they're doing less and less water changes. And there's a lot of conversation. And I personally feel that the conversation is good, but it's always been incomplete. And I can't promise that mine will be complete, but I think there are certain things that have been missed in each of the things I've seen so far that we need to consider to get the full picture. So, with that being said, why do we water change in the first place, right? This is the first question we need to ask ourselves before we determine whether we need to do more, less, the same amount, whatever. That depends heavily on your water system. So an example would be this: in a very high tech planted setup, you're probably using quite a lot of fertilizer. Maybe you're doing like the EI dosing method, or something else, and you're constantly every day putting new fertilizer in the tank to have lots and lots of stuff available for your plants. Well, eventually, assuming that the plants can't uptake everything at the same pace you're putting it in, you can put things like your nitrates into dangerous levels for your fish. So we do big water changes, usually 50% is the EI method. You know, the seventh day of the cycle, you do a 50% water change because you're removing all of the excess remaining fertilizers. And then you're repeating the process. Now, for other people, maybe you have like a bare bottom tank, and you don't have plants to absorb nitrates, and you're not doing something like a deep sand bed or a anoxic filtration system, some way to consume nitrates naturally. So you need to remove nitrates from your water system. Or here's another thing to think about. What if you have well water or some kind of water where you naturally have nitrates in the water itself? Maybe I've been talking with somebody over email trying to help them with some problems in their planted tank, and they have 20 ppm nitrates out of the tap. Well, you could, in theory, water change in order to dose nitrates to your plants. Rather than using fertilizers to get your nitrates, you could water change. And if you were to do a 50% water change and you had 0 ppm nitrates before, now you would have 20 ppm, 50% coming in, roughly 10 ppm nitrates across your water. It's not perfect, but it's a guesstimate. So there's a lot of reasons why we do water changes. So what lets us do less water changes? Because a lot of people don't want to do a water change every 3 days or once a week. Maybe you have lots and lots of tanks, so it's a lot of work to do a 50% water change on every tank. And you don't have an automatic water change system. Maybe you're using a Python. Hopefully you're not using buckets, but some people are using buckets, so you would definitely have a reason to want to do less water changes. You don't want to haul. If you're doing like, I need to do 400, buckets worth of that or whatever, right? Like some atrocious number. It feels like a lot. Maybe it's only like, I only have to do 10, 50 gallons of water. It's only 10 buckets. It's not that bad. But then again, you got to fill a bucket 10 times and haul that bad boy around 10 times, depending on how far your sink is to your tanks. That can be a lot of work. So there's several things we need to consider before we go, I can just do less water changes. And I think this is the thing that a few other people haven't necessarily paid attention to. Number one, what is our source water? So if it's at the tap or the well, city water, whatever it may be, what is that water like? And I think one of the biggest problems that we can often run into within the hobby is something like this. Do you test your tap water, the water that comes out of your sink, and then do you test it 24 hours later after it's been aerated the whole time? And let me give you some examples. Often in most city water, so something that's coming from municipal water, it's not coming out of a well, but sometimes some of the things in wells too will do this. It's just less common. You will have compounds within the water. And usually in the city water, these are buffering compounds that are designed to help protect the pipes that naturally gas off when they're aerated. They don't have to worry about it when they're inside the pipes because they're not getting this excessive aeration going on. But when they get into our tank and they start getting moved around and aerated, all of a sudden you'll have these things that maybe they push your pH up, or they add something to it. There's things like chlorine or chloramine that are added chemicals that alter the water in some way, shape, or form. And when they've been aerated, when they get out of the system, all of a sudden you can have problems. So an example, in the Seattle area, there's some small stuff they add to the water to help buffer the pH up, because we have very basic, soft water here. So it's not very high pH naturally. So in order to protect a lot of pipes and stuff like that and to make it simpler, they buffer the water up a little bit. Well, after 24 hours of aeration, that goes away, and if you're not using some kind of buffering compound in our water here, that water will crash. You'll have pH crashes because it gets very soft. There's like nothing in it. It's extremely basic. There's nothing to hold the pH. There's no buffer. And for those that are asking, Stephen P. specifically, but you have basic usually means slightly acidic water that tends to be softer. Simple water is basic. Alkaline is harder, typically it's actually measuring the pH scale. So a less acidic water is alkaline. A more acidic water is basic. Does that make sense? And it's just a matter of how the water in Seattle is sourced. Now, there's other things beyond our source water. Do we have something like plants that can remove those harmful substances? Plants will consume ammonia. They will consume nitrate. And one is easier than the other, but they adjust to their systems to learn what is being plentiful to take in, right? Well, if you don't have any plants in your tank, you probably don't have something that's consuming nitrates. And there are other natural ways we can do this. There are systems we can do that help deal with that. And Kelly's correcting me because I'm a dummy. I've had a long couple of days at work. It's like the crazy time in my work. So, yeah, basic is a type of alkaline. Sorry. So, I'm dumb, and this is where we get corrected. I'm not perfect. I'm human, right? And I'm not a water chemist either. I just know that my water is really easy to deal with. It has nothing in it. I need crushed coral to buffer it. But, so basic is lightly alkaline. Yeah, sorry. Acidic is lower pH, right? So, but the thing is, there's no carbonate hardness. Carbonate hardness is what typically holds our pH, right? So when that, whatever chemical's in there that helps hold the carbonate hardness gets gassed off, it can plummet. Yeah, I know. I'm a dum-dum. I'm sorry, chap. I'm sorry. It happens to the best of us. And then some other things we need to consider. What's our filter maintenance like? If you're a lazy bum like me and you don't maintain your filter like every week or every other week or something at a really often pace, you might have buildup of mold and particulates and all that kind of stuff that helps provide extra decomposing matter, which can create more ammonia, it can create more nitrite, it can create more nitrate. And so some of the ways that we help deal with that laziness is just by taking water out and diluting the parameters down with fresh, clean water. Now, in theory, we have a good bacterial colony that's helping us deal with that stuff. Mulm does eventually become, wow, the word just escaped me. Inert. That's the word. Mulm eventually becomes inert. It just takes a while. And then we want to consider things like how hard is our water out of the tap or how soft is our water compared to what we're trying to keep. That example goes back to me. My water's very soft. There's very little in it. A little bit of iron. That's about it. But if I keep, say, African cichlids, I need to have quite a lot of mineral content in there to make those African cichlids happy. So putting in this water with nothing in it is not going to be good long term. So if I do more frequent water changes, I probably have to either have some kind of consistent buffer or be adding some kind of chemical every time I do it to make those African cichlids happy. So these are the things we need to consider before we determine, can I do less water changes? Do I need to do the same number of water changes? Can I do more water changes, or should I do more water changes? Right? There's lots of stuff like this. And then also, the last thing we need to consider in all this, and I know I'm probably going a little deeper than I maybe should on this, and I think that's part of why some of the other videos are like a little more simple on this, but as we do less water changes, right, water will naturally acidify. There is an acidification process that occurs as we process through the nitrogen cycle. So as our bacteria break ammonia down into nitrite and then nitrite into nitrate, that does slowly acidify the water. And if we are not paying attention to those things, we could again run into issues where we go past whatever buffering capacity our water has naturally and cause some kind of crash. And the Filigree Aquatics mentions it's like old tank syndrome. Sometimes this is old tank syndrome. Not necessarily. Old tank syndrome actually is like a really complex concept and probably explained by somebody far better at science than me. But this is part of it. If you're not doing enough water maintenance in some way, shape, or form, you could, in theory, get that water to acidify over time. And you have other like dissolved organics, like if you have driftwood, it's slowly breaking down over time. It's slowly being turned into more humic substances and waste and all this kind of stuff, and that adds more and more. Maybe your snails don't live very long, like Chirish, and they help buffer your water up with the extra calcium. So there's lots of little things, right? Tons and tons of stuff. So what lets us actually do less water changes? Typically, we have to have a system that is designed to handle the final product of the nitrogen cycle, which usually means a planted tank, right? Usually we need some kind of planting to help consume the nitrates that will build up over time. Or we have to have something like a plenum, a biocenosis basket, biocenosis clarification basket, the full name. I know, I shorten it, but, a deep sand bed, some way that naturally denitrifies our water, right? I think plants is the easiest one. Plus, they look pretty. I might be biased because I love plants, but I think they look pretty. But it's not always the perfect answer, because you could have, like, say, well, I got a tank full of Java fern, right? But Java fern doesn't have a really high uptake. So you could eventually, if you have, say, a heavily stocked tank with kind of messy eaters, plecos would be a great example. Plecos will eat and eat and eat and eat. And eat and eat and eat and eat. And if you don't have the things to handle that, you will eventually build up the nitrates to a point of where it becomes potentially or actually dangerous for those fish. It's a lot harder to do, don't get me wrong, but when you have some plant life to help absorb those things, and denser plant life makes it easier, you can, in theory, as long as your tank is full through the process, it's properly processing the amount of ammonia, you're not seeing weird issues. Like if I were to go into my tank and all of a sudden I see this massive brown algae diatom outbreak, I know that something's gone wrong in my nitrogen cycle, in my beneficial bacteria. So I need to make sure that I probably need to water change is one of the first things, right? However, if everything's going right, I probably don't need to actually water change. I just need to top off. I just need to add that little bit of water so that I'm not getting the water level too low. We're going to have some evaporation, especially if we're heating our tanks. I love rainbow fish. They basically always have to have a heated tank. I'm not keeping my house at like 80 degrees at all times. But this is what helps. You do not always need to have fast-growing plants. Keep that in mind. It depends on your fish load. If you have a 40 breeder and you only keep, say, 6 Bozemanii rainbows in it, you can do just a bunch of Java fern and you'll be okay. But if you have a 40 breeder that has 20 tetras, a couple SAEs, some plecos, a bunch of corydoras, a betta fish, and something else, you probably need some far more aggressive growth plants that are consuming significantly more of those chemicals, right? So our nitrates specifically is really what we're looking at this point. That's going to help us handle these things. So usually, as long as we can like tell that our system's okay, and sometimes we just do this by testing, right? You can test the water in your tank, and if everything looked good, you don't necessarily need to water change. However, some people water change because the type of fish they keep are more likely to breed when water changes occur. So let's talk about why you would ever want more water changes, because I think we need to talk the opposite side of the spectrum, right? This is a little shorter, a little easier. So an example, you got somebody like Master Breeder Dean, keeps a lot of bare bottom tanks, or now he's doing this cool thing with like slate at the bottom, which I really like. It looks nice, but it has the same effect as a bare bottom. So it makes it, you could just look at a tank and know like, I need to clean that thing, right? When you get all that fish waste building up, especially if you got plecos, my plecos are messy, and I look at my tank and every week I'm like, I need to water change. And not because, and I keep plants to help keep things down. It's mostly because I want to clean up all that excessive bio load just to make sure we're okay, right? Again, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but if you have a really heavy fertilizer usage, right? You're probably going to want to pull some of those excess fertilizers out if you have really, really light plant requirements. So, for example, would be something like, I'm only keeping Anubiases and Booses in this tank. They don't absorb a ton of nitrates, but I have like, I don't know, a small colony of guppies, right? And they get pretty well fed every day. And I can see that like, I'm probably building some stuff up. It might be good to water change. Maybe you have a Corydora tank and you're trying to encourage breeding. Well, Corydoras respond typically to rainfall. The flooding season is when they breed. So if you do a big water change with cooler water than you would keep in the tank normally, so let's say your tank's at 78 degrees, right? That's the temperature you want. And you're going to water change with 72 degree water for like 50%. So that's going to cause a drop in the temperature overall of the tank temporarily. It triggers something in the cories to go like, oh, it's rainy flood season. And has there been plentiful food recently? It's time to make babies, right? These are reasons why we would look at potentially making more water changes to our system. Or if you have some kind of major outbreak, you're dosing medications recently. These are other reasons why you would want to be increasing the rate of your water changes. So I think this is one of the things where there's a lot of great topics and conversation recently about less water changes. And I think that's perfectly okay as long as you assess all the things that you need to assess. So we need to look at our source water and determine like what we're doing with our water. Are we just letting our water do its thing? Or are we trying to buffer in some way or the other? Are we trying to go up or down? Right? Maybe we're using RO water and we're taking a lot of stuff out, or we're using RO and then we're remineralizing to get to a very specific point. Then we might want to only top off with, instead of tap water, RO, or maybe even distilled water. Or is it something like, well, my water like has nothing in it except for some nitrates. It's kind of like fertilizer. So I water change to basically fertilize my plants. And I've talked about this a little bit with a person I'm emailing back and forth, but I'm trying to help them with their planet tank. And it's kind of this complex game, right? See, there's a lot of questions we have to ask ourselves before we can just jump to the conclusion of like, I can do less water changes. Make sure, if you're ever going to go to this route, and I think this is the one thing that's kind of not being stressed enough, that you do the right assessment. It's almost like instead of just pros and cons of being like, pro, I have to do less work. Con, I might forget how long it's been since I did a water change, right? Like, you need to make sure, like, okay, I need to compare my water. I need to make sure I've got the things removing any potential harmful issues that we would see in just like in your nitrogen cycle, right? Am I maintaining my filters while I'm not doing water changes? Like, am I still pulling my sponge filter out every couple weeks and giving it a good clean out to make sure that that's okay? Or am I also ignoring my filters at the same time? Do I have a really heavy stocking do I have a high bioload because I have a lot of fish? Maybe I've got like, that the thumbnail that I used was my Kochu tetras very early when I had them, after they kind of had all settled in and got their color up. I had 85 Kochu tetras in a 40-gallon breeder. And an old Manipisto that I'd adopted, and a small cleaning crew. That's a reasonable bioload if I don't have a lot of plants to help mitigate that bioload, right? So it's all about paying attention to all of these things and making sure that you're not just going, I can do less water changes. That dumb Bentley on YouTube said do less water changes. Make sure you're considering all of these things before you make that decision. And yeah, go get the new test strips from Co-op because they're super cheap compared to normal test strips. Test your water. If your water looks okay, just top it off. If something looks a little off in your water, do an actual water change. Dilution is the solution. It's an ancient rule in aquatics. Very often we just dilute water down, and you can fix a lot of problems with just reasonable water changes. Now, that being said, there's lots of common problems that people can run into where water changes are either the solution or the problem. And Filigree Aquatics kind of mentions this. I'm not sure, encouraging people to water change less, 99% of the time, it will help the common issues people have. Agreed. Lots of common issues can be solved with water changing at a good, reasonable rate. However, sometimes we over water change. I saw somebody mention in chat that they were doing like 90% water changes in their tank. And if I were to do that where I am, I would crash my pH like that, dude. Now, and this is a great quote, smaller but more frequently, from Lisa at KG Tropicals. Also, something that I've suggested to many people, if you normally do a 50% once a week, try doing like 25% every 3 days instead. In my automated water change system, whenever I get my garage done and build it out, my goal is to change 15% water in my tanks every day. It's a small little bit. Small little bits, right? That's a big thing. And yeah, and I understand that Bob talked about season tanks. I'm just saying there's little parts that, like, from each person, and these are experienced aquarists. They do have a good idea of what they're talking about. But you can space and say that basic is acidic, like this idiot. Right? You can forget little things, and those little things can matter a ton for whoever is receiving that advice. So I think it's really important we consider all these things before we decide less water changes, stay the same, maybe more water changes. You never know, right? It depends on each situation. Each person's water is different and unique. So us as aquarists learning to understand our water before we make those changes is really important. Then if we make an informed decision based on understanding all the parameters happening for our fish tanks, we're a lot better off. So with that being said, I'm gonna kill this off. We'll go into the question and answer session as usual. At Bentley Pasco makes it easy for me to see your questions. And then again, if for some reason I missed your question, do not hesitate to shoot me an email. I'll put it in chat, but it's bentley.pasco@gmail.com. Typically takes me 2 to 3 days to get back to you. This week might be a little slower just because it's going to be a really busy week for work, and I know I'm working this weekend. But typically 2 to 3 days is about my turnaround time. Yeah. All right. So we'll dive into questions. I think there was a couple early. I want to show you if I can find one. Oh, here's one for Raphael, which, by the way, saw your comment earlier today. What's up, buddy? Do you think it's needed or possible to cycle a Blackwater tank that's going to be pH 5.6? So here's the thing, right? At those kind of acidic pHs, it's much harder to get a proper bacterial colony. And I'm sure there's someone who can explain it far better than I am. because that's about the most that I understand, because I'm not really a Blackwater person. However, you could jumpstart some of the things in your system that will produce some amount of beneficial bacteria. You have to go, I think it's like pH 4 or 5 or something lower than that, that actually makes it almost impossible for the bacteria to survive, that we normally use aerobic bacteria, right? However, you can do things that allows other forms of bacteria to survive that will help in that system. I can't remember like what anaerobic requirements are as far as pH is concerned, but there's some there. So yeah, you can cycle. It's just not the same way, or the same volume, maybe is more accurate, that we would normally see in the more common, typical, like somewhere between 6.5 and 7.5 plus, right? It's, you have to deal with certain differences because of how acidic the water is when you start getting to those pHs, and especially when you get lower, because like Ultims in the wilds go as low as something like 3.5 or something really crazy like that. Yeah, the beneficial bacteria is way different when you get to those more acidic pH levels, but there is some. There's some, and there's somebody I'm sure that can explain that way better than me. Probably Scott over at Tannin Aquatics, because that guy is just amazing. And if you haven't, guys, if you're really interested in Blackwater, check out Tannin Aquatics. I'm no affiliation, nothing whatsoever. Just he came in to talk to my club. I talked to him for like 45 minutes after his talk. Just super nice dude, super knowledgeable. Has a pretty cool blog that he does some really interesting posts on. Just guy really knows his stuff. And he's super into Blackwater tanks and used to be an old like salt coral guy. So he knows a lot of this hobby. So plays, Bentley, what about phosphates and the hormones released by fish? So phosphates, that's going to come typically from your foods, and the hormones released by fish, like that shouldn't really cause too many issues, but usually we see those kind of things are like, tend to be more like the pheromones. So an example would be like, again, when you have rain happen in your tank, right? If we simulate rain or some kind of barometric shift in order to try and get, say, Corydoras to breed, they'll release pheromones into the water. And there's Eric Bodrock, who's all Oddball Aquatics out in Pennsylvania. Fantastic guy. Really knows his catfish, especially. And some rainbows, too. He's a rainbow guy, too. But he has systems designed so that a bunch of his breeding Corydoras are all on kind of one system, so that if one Corydora decides to spawn and they release those pheromones, it trickles down the rack, and those pheromones are in the water system and will trigger the other Corydoras to spawn. Now, granted, you have to be somebody who really knows your stuff and is playing it really, really safe with a lot of things in order to take that kind of risk where everything's on a shared system. But this is a guy who's been doing it for a long time. He really knows his stuff. I would have faith that he's doing it correctly, right? But it's one of the things that it's like kind of his breeding secret is that he uses triggering one pleco, or not pleco, but one Corydora to spawn, uses the pheromones that hit the water system to trickle down into the other tanks to help trigger the other Corydoras to breed, so that it can breed multiple species all in one shot, because one of the ones in the system decides, oh, I like that water change that just happened. I think it's time to make more babies. Smart stuff, right? So typically the hormones that you're dealing with, and pheromones especially, aren't going to be negative. Like, we don't think of them as toxic compounds, but you can purposely try to get things like that in the system to trigger fish to do certain things, right? It's something that we can do. Not common, because not a lot of people are trying to build these crazy shared breeding systems, because there's certain risks, right? But certainly does well. And another example, like Howard Aquatics, it just mentioned my heavily planted rainbow tank loves the big 50% water changes. Rainbows love water changes. And mine have been like a little grouchy at me because I've been topping off a lot lately. And my water changes, like actual water changes, have maybe been every 2 months. And a lot of it's just my schedule's been so horrific lately that to get the right time to do proper water changes in my house has been kind of infrequent. So I've noticed less spawning behavior in several of my tanks when I go to feed them on the weekends, because they want some water change. And I can almost literally trigger them by just water changing my tank. I've literally water changed one of my tanks like mixed group of bows. It's a holding tank until I can get the space to turn. Like there's several breeding pairs in this tank that are just waiting right now for when I have the space to rear fry. And it literally, like when I do a water change and then feed them, that just all the boys light up. I just start going all over the place, sparring, chasing the girls, like doing displays, the whole nines. It's like that. It's so funny because it's like, oh yeah, you guys appreciate a water change. I know. Don't worry, buddies. It's coming. I promise. Just you're doing okay. You got lots of plants to help keep you okay. do. Wow. All right. This is how I know I've a little behind. As usual, I'm behind on chat. Oh, we got our first friends saying stuff you're not supposed to say in chat. Jeezy crazy. Rocco's Fish Room. Was lurking, learning. Thanks for a great stream. If you guys haven't hit that like button, you guys are better YouTubers than I am because I don't. I never like ask for that stuff, especially when Candy's in chat. Like Candy's a way better YouTuber than I'm ever going to be, and she doesn't make any videos. By the way, I've heard that Candy Overhauls, the great Candy customer service Aquarium Co-op, is moving sort of in my area. I can't tell you how excited I am about that. I don't know if you guys realize that, but I love Candy to death because she's such a wonderful human being. And as soon as she moves here, I'm buying her some fish. That's my like homecoming gift or housewarming. That's the word. I can English. I'm gonna buy her some fish, man. This is how I work. Joe Davis, do you change water often on a new planted setup? So yeah, I tend to, when I do a full new planted setup, I tend to change water when I had more time. I don't really do new setups all that often anymore. I tend to change water about every 3 days for the first 2 weeks. So I'm basically doing 6 or 7 water changes in the first 2 weeks. And then from there, this is when I had a lot more free time. And I was trying to set up more tanks more often. From there, I can usually do like 50% once a week. I like doing 50%, but that's because I keep a lot of rainbows. Rainbows really love their water changes. But that being said, they've done fine without them too. So, and it depends. So I'm actually got a video that's coming out this Saturday. Yeah, this Saturday. I'm working. I gotta finish editing it. But there's a bunch of substrates that have like ammonia that they naturally release. However, there are other substrates that do the same thing. Hint, Brightwell. That's what I'm talking about Saturday, by the way. That do not release ammonia. So you actually don't have to do as many water changes early on if you have a reasonable plant load to start. So in general, like you can, typically it's safe to do more water changes at first. And as far as like a beginner, just to kind of tackle 2 of your questions in one shot, Joe, if you can, I personally, if I was to have the time again, I love doing like 25% every 3 days. And you can wiggle that a little bit. You could do 20%, you could do 30%, right? There's room, but like little water changes more frequently, I think is going to help you long term. But again, identify your source water first. And Joe, feel free, shoot me an email, talk to me about your source water if you've tested it after 24 hours of aeration in like a bucket. Because that'll tell us a lot about what is a good route to go that's beginner friendly and maybe doesn't use too much of your time, or if you have lots of time, is just like optimum for fish health depending on the fish you're keeping, right? We can work on that kind of stuff. So shoot me an email. I'll help you out with that. Paul Soltero. What's up, buddy? In the discus world, there's a segment that believes the only way to keep discus is in a bare bottom tank and do multiple 100% water changes a week. Plants in their tanks are a no-no. Well, I'm sure, and a lot of those people live in harder water places. If you're in the Northwest where we have like nothing in our water literally is like perfect for discus out of the tap. It's almost perfect. Because there's so little in it. It's pretty simple. it's great for discus. It's great for a lot of your Amazon fish. However, I think the more that we've got into line bred discus, the more that we've gotten this kind of paranoia around discus that they're super fragile. Because I can remember in the 80s as a kid, like, people would tell me what it took to keep discus, and it was just like, I can never do this as a kid. I love discus. They look so beautiful. I want to have them. There's no way I can keep them. And now I look at them as an adult, and I've seen wild discus deal with things that, like, I didn't think they could ever possibly handle, like it was nothing. So I think we kind of get into these stereotypes of old knowledge that might not be true anymore. Right? There's so much advance in technology and understanding that a lot of our generic information about some species of fish comes from like the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, and might not be relevant anymore because of the way things have changed, our understanding of how to keep a tank. Discus, I've seen plenty of discus do amazing in planted tanks, but I've also seen people who, like, put the wrong things in their tank and their discus gets spooked by a cat or a dog or something, and they ram themselves into stuff and get hurt, like rainbows do when they just, any time, because rainbows are dumb and run into stuff when they're trying to court females. It's all about, like, taking the time to really understand what you're doing with that fish and understanding your water. And then a lot of times you'll find that some of that sage advice doesn't apply to you. It applies to where they were. You could have somebody who's, like, trying to keep discus in Ohio, where you have much more hard, mineral-rich water, probably not going to do as well or be as simple as it is in, like, the Seattle water that has nothing in it. And high tech, to answer you really quickly, hard versus soft is really simple. Hard water has a higher general hardness, so GH. Sometimes we measure this with TDS, although that's not a perfectly accurate way to measure it. And then soft water has very little GH. So typically this is a GH of 3 or less is typically very soft water. 4 and 5 is kind of neutral as far as, like, hardness is concerned. And then anything above that, you get to, like, GHs of 8 degrees and higher, or 20 degrees. I've seen, like, people, like, 20 degrees hardness. They have a super, like, liquid rock out in, like, the Midwest and stuff. That's hard water. It just has, basically, it's how much mineral content is in the water. Very little mineral content, soft water. Lots of minerals and all sorts of good, wonderful things, hard water. But certain things do very well in hard water. Certain things do very poorly in hard water. And the same applies to soft water, right? So that's kind of the basics of understanding soft versus hard when I'm saying those things. Woo! Master photographer. Person who I think has, like, the nicest comments I ever get. Would a heavily planted tank that has cycled reduce the need for water changes, assuming water parameters are monitored? Short answer, yes. Long answer, understand your source water first. Then it'll tell you the truth. So, for an example, it'd be like if you have really, really, really soft water that's coming in, and there's very little mineral content to it, and maybe you don't have a lot of buffer in your water naturally, you have a risk of having a pH crash. However, typically, those of us who have really soft water, we buffer up a little bit to play it safe anyway. So usually, as long as you're monitoring, like if you're testing weekly or every 3 days even, yeah, you're fine. As long as you look at those numbers and they look good, top your water off a little bit. Now, if you need, like, super soft water and your water coming out of the tap is, like, rock hard, it's going to be the same process, right? You don't necessarily want to water change a lot. That's going to take a lot more work. But if it's the other way around, right, where you need extremely hard water, your water changes can change, right? There's lots of little nuance, but in general, the short answer is yes. And that's kind of how I do. I tend to have heavily planted tanks. I pay attention to the basics. Makes it very, very simple. All right. I saw a really good thing that I want to comment on in a sec, but I want to get this question first. Edward I hope the T's like silent. I don't want to pronounce that wrong. TDO. Heavily Bentley Pasco. Heavily flowering plants. Is it a cry for help, or are they feeling okay? No, flowering is great. Flowering means your plants are very healthy. So flowering typically is most common in like the spring, because plants naturally are going to do that. But they need to have certain minerals in their water in order to flower more often. So flowering usually means that plant is very healthy. It takes a lot of energy to expend flowers. Now, the opposite only really occurs when you come to adventitious child plants. This is usually all the microsorum species, so all our Java ferns, where like they have seedlings built into their leaves, for an example. If you ever look at the back of a Java fern, there's those little dots. Those are actually seeds, basically put. If those are all starting to grow out of nowhere, that usually means that plant is in stress, and what it's trying to do is basically create child plants to hurl downstream or hurl somewhere else and hope that they survive, knowing that the mother plant is probably not going to. That's what it's doing in nature. So that's about the only time where the kind of the flowering appearance, where there's lots of child plants coming out of something, and I know it's not flowers, but just bear with me a little bit on this, is a sign of stress. Otherwise, flowering, you're doing it right if you're getting flowers. That's good news. Flowers equals good. That's the easiest way to look at it. All right. I want to this one little comment, and then I got like back to questions. But from Alec, Tom Barr spoke Sunday at the virtual NEC conference. Yes, he did. I'm sure it was fantastic. I was super busy and I couldn't watch. Said he had 4 tanks in his garage that he never does water changes on, just tops them off. Then he told us why. Modest, but totally knows his stuff. Yes. And you know, Tom Barr is a freaking wizard, right? I mean, the guy really knows his stuff. And I would encourage people to, like, when people tell you why they don't do water changes, listen to the details. The little details are typically what matter and help us. However, don't just because, like, I say I do less water changes doesn't necessarily mean that you should, right? This is, again, going back to that analysis of understanding our water, understanding our tank, then making that decision, right? It's really, really important, because we need to have that understanding of our own system, because the person who's saying it, especially on YouTube, probably has no clue what your system's like. And that's important, right? Understanding our own system, that's what elevates you from, like, starting aquarist to, like, expert. And then you can go from expert, you can really launch your understanding and your knowledge. But one of the big things that takes you to that level is getting that good grip on what your water is like, both from the source and in your tanks. And you don't have to be a water chemist, obviously, because I said some dumb stuff earlier. But it helps, right? It's sure it helps. JW Aquatica, thank you so much for the super chat, man. Awesome live stream. What are your thoughts on intentionally adding a colony of ostracods, specifically seed shrimp, as a supplemental cleanup crew? So you could do this in multiple ways. Like, there's people who will add scuds to deal with green water, for example. This is a similar mentality, right? You're trying to clean up green water, so you add scuds, and then it produces food for your fish in some way. Seed shrimp to act as a cleaning crew. I look at it like this. Your fish are likely to try and eat seed shrimp, right? Right? So you might not have a long-term solution. I'm all for having livestock to act as a cleaning crew, because they do that in nature, right? And they might not do that in the same biotope, but their role in nature is very specific. So I think that there's a lot of YouTubers who love to, like, say, like, never add a fish just to be cleanup crew. I think it's fine as long as you understand that once the main problem they're there to solve is gone, they still have to have some form of nutrition. So an example would be something like this. Let's say you have a blackbeard algae breakout, and you're going to get SAEs to clean it up. This guy does this all the time. Blackbeard's really easy to get where I'm at. After they've cleaned that up, do they still have significant food sources to graze on, or you're giving them algae wafers, whatever it may be, to make sure that they remain healthy for their life. Then, as long as you're doing that, it's perfectly okay to use livestock as the cleanup crew. Just understand that we can't just like throw fish or seed shrimp or anything, whatever it may be, into our tank and go like, okay, clean up that problem, and then forget about what happens after the problem is taken care of. And the problem can be in quotations like this, right? I think that's important. As long as we consider what happens after the fact, it's perfectly fine to use livestock in that note, especially if you enjoy keeping that livestock. I love autosynclus. I have autosynclus in every single tank. Okay, that's not true. Some of my breeding tanks don't have autosynclus, but all of my tanks that have plants have autosynclus. And I love them. I love them. I will happily go to a store when they don't cost me like $8 a piece, because pandemic is the worst, and buy myself like, oh, I need like 10 more autosynclus. That's fine. I'll buy 10 more autosynclus. I've got tanks that have only a certain amount. They can always use more. They're social. They get better and better groups. And I tend to produce lots of biofilm because I have heavily planted tanks. So they kind of always have something to graze on. That's perfectly fine. I know that I'm producing enough to make sure that they're going to be fat and happy for the whole entirety of their lives. Rather than just like, I've got brown algae. Let me put some autosynclus in there to fix the problem. And then I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure there's never any algae ever again. What are these autosynclus going to graze on, right? So it's making sure we understand these things and pay attention to them so that if we do use livestock for the entirety of their life, they can live a good life and have plenty of food sources. I hope that helps, JDW. And then Bottom Dweller Quacks, welcome to Autosynclus, buddy. I got to change the membership. I keep saying I need to change it. I'm doing a really simple change. It's going to be 2 levels, nice and simple, no crazy stuff. I just want it easy peasy, especially while I'm working my brains out. So I haven't had as much time to do some of the member stuff I want to do. So I'm going to like make some alterations, but also I'm just going to say this. There might be some really cool things about being a member when it comes to the aquatic horticulture program that I am working on. And I should have a big update for that next week too, by the way. Just a heads up. Frankie Fins, should I treat my 1-week-old fry 20-gallon tank like any other tank, basically test to track nitrates when it gets high, change water, there's only fry and plants floating? Well, I would try not to get the nitrates high. I would say once you start getting toward that 20 to 40 ppm threshold, you need to think about doing a water change. Anything higher than that, you have some level of risk. But yeah, I basically treat the tank as you would anything else, but just keep in mind that if it's relatively new, you may not have completed the full nitrogen cycle. So you need to be wary of that because you're probably still going to deal with these things like the diatom algae stage and things like that. Just be aware that those are going to occur. And as long as you treat it like you would any new tank that just has a higher livestock to it, so maybe be a little more careful, test a little more frequently, you should be okay. But again, keep in mind, test a little more frequently. If you're very early into the cycle and you have quite a lot of fry, you might need to change slightly more water. And there's a very careful process depending on how fragile those fry are. So it kind of depends on what type of fish you have in there, how many, and then how well did you like seed the tank ahead of time or anything like that, right? There's lots of little questions that will give us the answer. It's just addressing those little questions like you should in theory with any other tank. Woo! I know I'm behind chat. There's the jump. I've been waiting for that bad boy. I gotta scroll back up and find the stuff I missed. Christopher, what's the biology behind some fish doing good in hard water and some in soft water? That's really simple. It's just the water that they came from in nature. So an example like the rift lakes, the African lakes like Tanganyika, Lake Malawi, they're Lake Victoria, the third. I'm almost spaced on that one. They are very mineral rich, right? So they're naturally going to be harder water. Whereas something like, say, the Northwest, where there's lots of streams and glacial water and runoff that comes from basically snow melt and glacier melt, there's not very much mineral content to it, so that water is very soft. It's all about the environment those fish naturally came from. So you're going to find like the Amazon River, for example, tends to be very soft water. Often has a lot of tannins to it, and there's actually quite a lot of like silt and all sorts of random stuff, but there's so much water volume, right, that the water tends to stay very soft. There's tons and tons of rainwater. You're in massive rainforests, right? Rain has very little in it. It's not sitting in something that is very mineral rich like some of those lakes to keep getting those harder and harder waters. So the fish naturally come from systems that are one way or another, so that just tends to be how they've adapted to live in those water systems. And we tend to bring those things into our home aquariums because it requires the fish to not effectively evolve even further and handle those parameters a little more naturally. That's really all it comes down to. It's what they evolved inside of. Stephen P. My guppies can't eat seed shrimp. They spit them out. Shell must be too hard. That's interesting to know. That's really interesting to know. Like, I personally haven't messed with seed shrimp personally, but it's one of those things where, like, I know some people that have done all sorts of crazy, like, experiments with seed shrimp or try to keep them as a food source for some of their fish that can handle it. But yeah, it's interesting. The guppies can't eat it because guppies are, while not very big fish, they're very happy eaters. Alec mentioning also from Tabar suggested if you're busy, just do one CO2 tank and the rest low tech. Yeah, totally. Or do very, very low amounts of CO2. Like I love to preach what I call the American barbecue method of CO2, which is low and slow. You know, something like a 40-gallon breeder that only gets one bubble per second. It's just enough to get that slight more lush growth and a little bit better color, but not so much that the plants grow like crazy fast and get out of control on you. It can be really amazing to put very low amounts. Kelly Foreman. Hi, Bentley. Would you prefer support on Patreon or through YouTube membership? It doesn't matter to me. I think you get better bang for your buck at YouTube membership because you get access to certain things that are inherent to YouTube. And I don't care, right? I'm very fortunate. I have a very good career. That's part of why my life is as crazy as it is. So the financial side of it is not something I care so much about. Like, the channel does perfectly fine for what I want it to do, which is to say, as of now, it's more of my fun. I mean, technically it's a business, right? Because I have to do it for tax purposes, but like, it's kind of like more a hobby than it's my goal to be like my grand career or my retirement plan, right? That doesn't matter so much to me. What matters to me is for those who want to do those things, that they feel like they're choosing the option that gives them the best thing. Like, I asked my Patreons a while back, should I close Patreon and only do YouTube membership? Because you get slightly more benefits through YouTube inherently in the system. And part of that is just like my time has been such a nightmare that I can't dedicate, like, say, as much as Corey and his crew can, right? I mean, their membership benefits are amazing. But I think it's up to you. Like, me personally, I would say you probably get more benefit out of YouTube, even though technically I get slightly less back from it. That's not what I care about. What I care about is if you choose to go that route, that you choose what feels best for you, the person. Don't worry about me. I'm doing just fine. Right? I am doing A-okay. You will know if I'm in some trouble because I'll be panicking my brains out, or you'll see like a million videos all of a sudden come out because all of a sudden I have free time. I hate to laugh at it, but like, yeah, that's one of them. Raphael, after watching your Aqua Sky video, I'm tempted to get one for Blackwater 30-gallon with Apistos and green neons, planting pennywort and Echinodorus horizontalis. Make sure I read that right. Plus some floaters. Thoughts? Yeah. So far, I've got minimal time with it, but I think if you're trying to do something that is inherently lower light requirement, it's a pretty good light. Now, granted, I haven't played with it long enough. There's some problems if you're not going to use like the auto pro mode. In manual mode, you can only adjust in 20% increments. So you can adjust by 1%, but there's ways to like trick the system, and I'll talk about that in the full review. Actually, I had some really good comments from somebody earlier today that I kind of went back and forth with some stuff, just kind of us with our experiences thus far, right? Because like it's simulating my dusty remote from my Fluwell Flex here, but it's simulating one of these remotes, and the up and down range is really small, and I think that's probably the only negative I've found so far, as far as a user perspective, is that like unlike the plant, I can't do the manual in 1% increments or fully controlled. I just have like up and down, and there's only 20% at a time, so it's kind of like that sucks. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, I think it's great if you're doing lower light requirement. It's not quite as expensive. It's a slightly smaller light. It looks very similar in its light, in its color temperature. So it has that kind of natural warm cast, which does look very good in Blackwater tanks. It's really similar to a plant. It's just there is less power naturally, right, and less LEDs. But otherwise, pretty good light. So far, I'm really early. I got a lot of monkeying with it to do. That's gonna take me a few months. Orphan Slayer, what's up? We've been having some email conversement. What is your favorite tetra species? I have two. So I have two for two different reasons. As far as like a more colorful tetra, I like the Kochu tetra a lot, which is what's in the thumbnail. Although there's some interesting debate back and forth between whether it's actually truly Bolkea Fred Kochui, the true Kochu tetra, or whether it's, what is it, Notice Bolkai? I can't remember the other version. And there's a lot of conversation back and forth between whether it's the same Kochu tetra that was discovered when Fred Kochu was out there, or whether it's something else. But regardless, it's the Kochu tetra. I love them. I think they look really, really great. The second favorite tetra is less colorful. I love penguin tetras. I love that little like kind of hockey stick black mark on the tail on a silver fish. I actually like silver and black fish quite a lot. I love rainbows so much more. But you'll notice, like, I purposely keep things like reticulated SAEs and stuff like that as my cleaners. And part of that is because I like the way that they are colored. I like their color pattern and the way that they look as a fish. I used to, like, way back when I kept some predatory cichlids, South American, like, aggressive cichlids, I also kept things like bala sharks. And I know, like, they get huge and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I know. I had tinfoil barbs, too. I love those things. But I wouldn't want to keep them now because of, like, temperament things, right? And how big they get compared to the fish I want to keep. So it's just, like, the way that my hobby has changed. There are certain fish I really appreciate. Penguin tetras are one of them. I think they're just a super cool and underappreciated tetra species. But there's a lot you could probably give the same statement about. There's so many tetras. Ooh, the jump again. Hillbilly Aquatics with the 99-cent poo emoji. What's up, buddy? Thanks, man. I know. That's your opinion of my stream. Which, by the way, for those curious, Dr. Black's not going to be streaming tonight. He's got some stuff going on in his life. So he won't be streaming tonight. So I'm going to go slightly longer tonight. Probably another 10, 15 minutes or so. And again, if I don't get your question, please, by all means, shoot me an email. bentley.pasco@gmail.com. Again, it takes me typically 2 to 3 days to get back, but I will respond to you. Don't worry. Tatiana, I'm cycling my 44-gallon and am changing water daily for 2 weeks now, and the ammonia is still there. I have about 9 pounds of ADA soil. Any recommendations? You're going to see, if it's Amazonia 1, especially, you're going to see ammonia in your system for a couple of weeks. And realistically, 44-gallon with 9 pounds, you'll actually probably see that for like a month. And I know it sucks. Yeah, trust me, I know it sucks. But eventually, your bacteria colony will catch up, and your plants will catch up, and then you'll stop registering ammonia on your tests, and you'll be all right. I had the same thing when I did a lot of... So my big rainbow display tank that's downstairs, it's got a ton of ADA soil in it, and it took me, I think, 2 months to stop registering any ammonia in my tests. And that was after having it planted. It was planted with an FX6 and another filter, all doing all my filtration. It took me 2 months before I stopped registering ammonia from all that ADA soil. It's the one downside to ADA is it produces a lot of ammonia at first, but that can be really good for ensuring that your biomass colony, right, all that beneficial bacteria gets established. It produces that food for them initially, so that you never need fish in order to get your cycle going. Jacob H., my favorite barber friend. I find Pacific Northwest water runs hard south of Chehalis area. Seems like very sulfurous and mineral-laden water. Yeah, and part of that is because you're getting away from as much of the like glacier-based systems, and also you're in a different watershed. So like the watersheds that feed Seattle, for example, they're inherently really, really soft water naturally. Whereas some of the watersheds that go south, or if you go to the east, right, they actually become significantly harder. So it's kind of really just like Seattle and its area with a lot of the water runoff that's in like Snoqualmie and stuff like that. And I can't remember the name of the main watershed that does most of the work out here, but it's like incredibly soft water, and that's why it's so soft out here. Naidu, Bentley, what are your top plants to help reduce water changes? Water wisteria, water sprite, Pogostaban stellatus octopus, and is there anything else that I think? If you have a lot of like just regular Rotala rotundifolia, because that stuff can be really aggressive on growth, especially if it has a little bit of CO2. Those are probably the biggest nitrate sponges. Also you could do Cambamba. That is a big nitrate sponge too. It's just it's not a plant you're really supposed to have in Washington, so I tend not to suggest it by the nature of like knowing that I'm not supposed to keep it and others probably shouldn't. But that's because of my state, and not necessarily just because it's a bad plant or that it has issues within the rest of the U.S. Tatiana, I'm changing my water on the 44 gallon every day with ADA soil. Still has ammonia. So let me ask you this. What's your plant load like? Because if you don't have plants, you're going to have trouble dealing with that. And then secondly, as Steve just mentioned right afterward, make sure you test your water coming out of the tap. Because your water out of the tap might have a little bit of ammonia in it. And if so, it's going to throw your results off. It could have some other stuff that throws your results off. Just make sure you have really good aeration. And I would put plants in. If you don't have plants with ADA soil, you're going to deal with ammonia forever. The big thing about ADA is establishing those plant roots, and the way that it's designed is to help plants establish themselves and settle in really, really well and get very, very healthy before fish start coming in. That's half the way that ADA's soil is designed. A lot of the aqua soils are designed. Jerry, moving to a new house, my wife said I could use the garage as my fish area, but it's too small for our car and my fish. I think I should sell the car. What would you do? I never park my car in the garage. I have always parked my car outside. And that was even when I had a brand new factory ordered Mustang GT, which it's the same car that I still have almost 16 years later. I have a 2005 Mustang GT. It's my baby. I had it built by Ford at the factory. It is my car, and that was just because what I wanted wasn't available when it came out. As the first year of that car. It's the only new car I've ever owned, and probably will be the only new car I ever own. But yeah, I still parked it outside. It's just the way things are. Like the garage was always a workspace for me because my dad, I was raised in a hot rod shop, right? So the garage wasn't where we stored cars. The garage is where we worked on cars. So I've kind of always been in that mentality. And my garage, when it's empty, it will definitely not hold a car ever. It will be full of fish tanks. That's just the way I am. Oh, there's a big jump. That's how I know I'm super far behind. Dave from Iowa, what is your favorite carpeting plant in sand substrate? Well, I hate sand substrate. I would say the easiest to probably get carpeting is going to be something like pygmy chainsword. So that's Halanthium tenellum. That's probably the easiest to get going. You could also do some of the shorter crypts, so like cryptslucens, Yeah, loosens. Not parva. Crypt parva like actually is really hard to carpet. It takes a long time, and it especially is hard in something like sand. I also wouldn't necessarily look at things like Monte Carlo or Cuba, which is Dwarf Baby Tears is the other name. Sorry, I'm just like a couple different names, but like I would generally go towards something like that. Or if you're really spicy, you can try and do the like using the Marimo moss ball technique to create a carpet by attaching it to like rocks and spreading them strategically around. But I think that's more trouble than it's worth getting into. I just carpeting in sand can be really really hard, really really hard, and especially like 8.2 pH hard water. Also, you got a lot of things unfortunately working against you. However, it's possible. The the chain swords can do it, and they don't get super tall, which is the big thing. Because like Val and Dwarf Sagil and stuff, they will get tall over time. Whereas the Pygmy Chainsword, yeah, it's only about yay. It's like thin grass. You might also have luck with hairgrass, but I've noticed that hairgrass tends to like a more open system to start spreading around in because it's so fine. But that might just be my experience. Let me see here. I want to get a couple of questions before we end out for the night. Kyle's Aquarimetrics, how big is that rainbow display tank? It's technically 139 gallons before accounting for the filters. Yeah. So it's an older 6-foot tank, which they used to call them 150s, even though they were never 150 gallons. But yeah, it's 139. I would say realistically, it probably holds about 130 gallons with the amount of substrate that's in there and like hardscape and all that. But it's a good amount of water. It's not huge, but it's pretty good size. I will be building something bigger, so I'm going to have some larger display tanks. Not super large, nothing like 240s or anything like that. But I'm probably going to do a few 150-gallon custom-built acrylics when I do my garage at some point. It be mean, G. I hope that's how I'm supposed to pronounce your name, but it's great if that is. Do you see any problems with using land moss in an aquarium? Guppy, snail, shrimp, SAE. No, actually, there's plenty of terrestrial mosses that get used for things that come out of water. I would not keep them underwater submerged the whole time because most of them are not they're not accustomed to living that way like aquatic mosses are. But like using a terrestrial moss that's like up on a piece of wood that comes out of your tank and it just barely touches the water, so it's wicking some moisture up to keep itself okay. I see that in aquascapes all the time. The guys at the Green Machine, which is a British channel that used to do tons of really beautiful videos. They haven't done anything in a while, but they've done several aquascapes using terrestrial moss out of the water to get this really cool nature vibe going. Let's see here. I thought I missed something. I want to make sure I didn't. Oh, nope. Lots of conversation trying to help out. I appreciate it, folks. I appreciate. I want to get like one or two more. Stephen P. I thought Washington just banned purple or red Kabamba. I wouldn't be surprised if they did, because Kabamba is a massive problem in our water systems. And there's talk about like Portland water and Tacoma water being very soft. Yeah, it's really similar to the Seattle area. Just it's interesting where there's parts that are crazy. And yeah, the Stencardiscus are used to hard water. Come on, man. We know that. Naidu. Any tips on aquascaping? I'm going to answer this because I think it's important and it'll make me laugh. I'm having trouble with plants that cut off light for other plants. Should I start cutting all the plants the same length? Tips on aquascaping. Watch channels other than mine. I am not an aquascaper. I'm a terrible aquascaper. I would suggest something like Green Aqua. They have phenomenal guests that have come and done like lectures on how to aquascape. Now, what I would do instead, this is a plant tip instead. Don't think of this as an aquascaping tip, although you can use it in aquascaping. Plan your tall plants to naturally shade the shorter plants that like to be shaded. So your Anubiuses, your Booses, some Crypts, but typically Anubius and Boos. Some Java Fern likes to be shaded. Plan to put those plants naturally in the shade. If something likes a lot of light, then yeah, you're going to have to do trim work to make sure that all the plants get light. But there are plenty of plants that actually survive significantly better in lightly shaded areas. Certain crypts will do this. Almost all the Anubias does this, except for the white varieties, and almost all the Boost does this. So if we plan for the dark or shaded areas to have the right plants, it works out naturally, and it looks beautiful if it's done correctly. Because you get some really interesting color that happens to a lot of those plants that like to be shaded when they are kept shaded. I hope that helps. But for like true aquascaping, like tips on how to do that kind of stuff and set it up right in a nice aquascape, as opposed to like I just put plants where I want to put them and let them grow and do their thing. That's what I do, aka I can't aquascape. I would look at like somebody like your George Farmers. There's Green Aqua, of course. Why am I spacing on his name? He just like second in the IAPLC. Was it Stephen Chow? Right? No, Stephen Chow's not in the U.S. That's, but there's lots of great aquascapers out there. Trust me. Start with like George Farmer and Green Aqua and like expand from there. Like follow. Green Aqua has lots of great guest structures and are amazing aquascapers. I'm a terrible aquascaper. I'm just good at growing plants generically. Oh, chat. That's how I know I'm way behind. And actually, I'm not as far behind as I thought. All right. Martin, any ideas for plants to use in an overhand plant filter filled with... Oh, man. Is it leca? Is that how that's supposed to be pronounced? I actually don't know what that is. The clay pebbles for... Yeah. So I would look at like epiphyte type plants, things that naturally do well by having just their roots submerged and the rest of them being out of water. There's tons of options. Various Java ferns, lots of Anubiases and Booses grow phenomenally when they're done like that. The other thing that you could look into is like Bulbitis. A lot of the ferns do really well this way in general. Also, you can do some of the like more reedy, and by that I mean like they have the more stiff stems. So a lot of like your some of the like different the Hygrophila, so like Willow Hygro Compact, the Hygrophila Compacta, some of those actually do really well that way. Or you could look at there's a species Persicaria is also really, really good. That's a stem plant species that does really well in those kind of settings. But in general, I would look at something more like some of the Java fern type species. They do really good in that setup, and they actually, when they're exposed to open air like that, they grow a lot faster, so they'll absorb more. But lots of like leafy type greens tend to do well too. So like you could grow your own kale, for example, if you wanted to, or lettuce, or what have you. Lots of options. Lots and lots of options for that kind of setup. Kylan Landry, Bentley, if you could only have one plant for the rest of your life, what would it be? Ooh. Probably Crypts. But if you mean like only one species and not like one genus, right? If I could only do one period plant species, it would actually change. So I choose Crypts when I have like all the Crypts because I have a lot of range. But if I can only keep one species, it would probably be Nymphaea zenkeri, aka the red tiger lotus, because I really love those plants. I only actually keep them right now in one tank, but I've been growing them for a long time. I love Nymphaeas in general, but I love the red tiger lotus just because it's such a beautiful plant, and it leaves lots of room underneath for fish to swim around, which I find kind of enjoyable. It gives them kind of a natural shelter, which I just like that. It's a really cool interaction. But yeah, it's like the Sophie's Choice thing, right? Choose one thing. It's like, but then I'll like immediately contradict myself. Well, yeah, but if I want to grow things on wood, I really love having some Java fern, or like tucking Java fern between rock looks so good, and needleleaf Java fern always looks amazing, but so does trident. Then there's this Java fern, and there's that. You get into that, right? I think one of the things is like, tell me to pick like one species from each category. Maybe that's a little easier. Like, okay, you get one epiphyte, one moss, one one stem. Then I can make a tank, and it's at least a little nicer. Oh man, I gotta giggle at myself for these things. Multi tank addiction. Man, I got two of you just pooping on me. You bastards. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate the poo emoji. Let's see. I want to make sure I don't have one last question. I thought I did that I want to grab, but yeah. Thank you, Kelly Foreman, Stephen Chong. Not, thank you. That guy's phenomenal. He's just like such a happy dude to listen to. I absolutely love that guy. His stuff about how he did his tank in the most recent contest is just I watched it like just glued to it. It's one of the few things that like pulled all of my attention away from everything I was doing to figure out how he did what he did. All right. So with that being said, we're gonna start killing this bad boy off. So just remember, there's no Dr. Blackstream tonight. He's got some family stuff going on. So hopefully some other fish tubers out there, but if not, I hope you all guys. How bad my English is at the end of the night. I hope you all have a fantastic night. Can you believe that I at one point worked in radio with how much I like slip up and screw up speaking English? English is such a simple language. It only has like 26 sounds for the letter A. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week, and stay awesome. Oh, Lord.